And very good evening to the friends from the media, my colleagues, Ambassador Manish Prabhat, Arindam, of course, Yojana, and Adarsh, Joint Secretary for Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the ERS Division, respectively. We are running on a bit of a tight schedule because there is a departure underway, so we will keep it relatively short, including in terms of follow-up questions that might come. Thanks once again for coming here this evening. I know we are all rushed. As you are all aware, Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Samarkand last night to attend the 22nd meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Prime Minister, during his multiple interactions during the course of day-to-day, offered sincere gratitude to the Uzbek side and to the Uzbek President for the excellent arrangements and the warm hospitality that was extended to all the delegations, including India. As you know, the summit took place earlier this morning, divided in two sessions. One, the restricted, where the members, 8 member states participated, and the extended session where the member states, along with the observers and the invited countries, participated and spoke. Prime Minister's intervention in the extended session has already been shared with you. I would just take this opportunity to highlight some of the key elements of Prime Minister's intervention spread across the two sessions. One, he shared India's perspective on the regional and international situation and the issues of regional peace and security, including in Afghanistan. As you all know, issues of development in the region and all over the world are a matter of agenda item under the SCO discussions. Two, he emphasized on the centrality of the aspirations and the needs of the Central Asian republics in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Three, need for greater cooperation to fight terrorism in the region. And in this context, he emphasized the role that SCO can play, important role that SCO can play, including through the work of the SCO RATS organization, which is the SCO's structure, entity structure to counter the threat of terrorism in our region. Four, emphasize the need for better regional connectivity, which is absolutely essential for greater economic and trade cooperation between India and the SCO member countries, India and Central Asia. And in this context, the entire membership, including the Prime Minister, welcomed the inclusion of Iran as a member state of the SCO during this summit. Chabahar, another important project for regional connectivity, along with the India North-South Transport Corridor, was also mentioned in Prime Minister's intervention. Prime Minister also reiterated his support for the ongoing expansion of the organization. And in this context, we welcomed Iran and Belarus as new member states. Of course, the two are in different stages of process in terms of their onboarding as member state. And also the inclusion of UAE, the Maldives, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Myanmar as new dialogue partners of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Prime Minister also drew attention to the need for substantive cooperation in the field of trade and economy, humanitarian and development partnerships, and using the millennia-old civilizational ties between the SCO member state as a foundation on which to build these two layers of cooperation between India and the SCO. And in this context, Prime Minister Modi thanked all the member states of the SCO for endorsing Varanasi, Kashi, as the first ever SCO tourist and cultural capital during the upcoming year 2022-23. I would like to underline that this is a befitting recognition of the historic city of Varanasi and opens the door for greater cultural and people-to-people ties between India and the region. As part of this declaration of Kashi as the SCO tourist and cultural capital during the upcoming year. There would be several events by the government of UP and in collaboration with the central government, which would be organized in Varanasi to celebrate this recognition by the SCO of that city. Among the outcomes, a large number of documents were signed at both levels, one by the heads of states and government, and two at a function level. I think in our case, Ambassador would be signing it. But among the main outcomes was the Samarkand Declaration, which emanated from the summit. The leaders also adopted a statement on response to climate change. At our initiative, this is something which I touched upon very briefly at yesterday's presser also. The SCO has also decided to create a special working group on the startup and innovation. I would just like to repeat what I said yesterday, that as the chair of this special working group, we would be permanent chair of this group. That's the notion of special working group. And in this, Prime Minister himself also laid emphasis on this issue during his intervention. And today's decision will help promote the infusion of the startup culture within the SCO framework and the connect between the SCO membership, the Central Asian countries, with the Indian startup and innovation system. SCO also approved another Indian initiative, recognized another Indian initiative through the setting up of an expert working group on traditional medicine. This is another area where you all know that India has global leadership capabilities and is recognized as such. You would also recall in this context the recent launch of the WHO Global Center for Traditional Medicine in the state of Gujarat. On terrorism, SCO agreed to work towards developing a unified list of terrorist, separatist, and extremist organizations whose activities are prohibited on the territories of the SCO member state. I must mention that each of the SCO member states was very, very clear in recognizing the threat that this challenge poses to our region and across the membership of the SCO. There were also a couple of intergovernmental agreements which were approved, including in the field of tourism and on plant quarantine issue. There were a couple of other agreements which were approved, which included the digital literacy agreement on renewable energy resources, stimulating industrial cooperation, etc. In addition to his participation and interventions through the restricted and the extended format, Prime Minister also held bilateral meetings with the leaders of Uzbekistan, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. I will just quickly run through key pointers which came up in each of these meetings. Some of this, I believe, have already been released as a press statement already. In Uzbekistan, essentially 5 things, broad pointers. One, the two leaders noted the 30th anniversary of our bilateral ties. Second, both emphasized and clearly identified practical steps that the two countries would take to further bilateral economic cooperation, in particular trade and investment-based linkages. 3, need to strengthen, improve connectivity between the two countries, including in this case through Chabahar Port and the North-South Transport Corridor. 4, expeditious implementation of the decisions that were taken during the first India-Central Asia Summit earlier during the year. And 5, the regional issues of common interest and common concern with regard to both countries, including the situation in Afghanistan and, of course, the threat of terrorism. With regard to Russia, you all heard what the two leaders said in their initial opening remarks, which were open live to the press. But besides that, the discussions between Prime Minister and President Putin of Russia included extensive conversation on the entire range of important bilateral cooperation issues across the full gamut of engagement Two, naturally, the situation in Ukraine came up, and you heard part of what both leaders said in their opening conversation. But in their follow-up conversation, there was also focus on the derivative issues of the Russia-Ukraine situation, including to food security, energy security, and of course, fertilizer security. Three, the issue of challenge of terrorism, which of course was also another element of discussion. Prime Minister, as he has often said and hinted at that in his opening remark, reiterated his call for cessation of hostilities and the need for dialogue and diplomacy. In his last meeting, which just concluded with the President of Iran, there were 3-4 key elements which will highlight. One, Prime Minister congratulated the Iranian President because this was their first meeting in person. Congratulated him for assuming the presidency. Two, again, a full range of, I would say, assessment of a full range of things that the two countries do in the field of trade, investment, and the entire range of economic cooperation. And this, of course, includes our discussions on energy-related issues, cooperation between the two countries. Three, Chabahar Port has been a very one of important pillars of our engagement between India and Iran. And India, as you know, has already invested close to about $85+ million in that project. The need for both our countries to expedite the how should I say the growth of Chabahar Port further, so that it serves as an important transit point for a larger connectivity across the region, east, west, and north, south, both of them. President Raisi also briefed the Prime Minister on the ongoing JCP, on the state of JCPOA negotiations. I must also mention that Prime Minister also met with the Turkish President earlier during the day, and a brief but extensive discussion in terms of areas of that interest both India and Turkey, in terms of what they do bilaterally, in terms of how they can converge regionally, and also in terms of how their perspectives can meet more strongly with regard to developments all over the world. They spoke about recent gains in bilateral trade, which have been fairly extensive. Trade is touching close to about $10 billion. Clear, specific elements of deepening economic linkages, and of course, as I said, developments in the region and all over the world. Less than 24 hours of visit, but you can clearly see, recognize, and appreciate fairly packed schedule, very, very productive and useful conversations, both the membership of the SCO and in particular the leaders that I mentioned. We have been able to, I think, contribute quite successfully to the substance of SCO agenda, but also use this opportunity to build new layers of engagement with other bilateral partners whose brief details I listed. I think I should stop here and would be happy to take questions. I must mention we are on tight schedule. Quick question, please comment.
Sir, I'll take a round of questions and that will be the
first
only
and
one.
The last one.
Okay, we'll start with you here.
सर मैं
Microphone, but
सर
tight रखिए.
बिल्कुल सर मैं ब्रह्म प्रकाश हूँ जी न्यूज़ से. मेरा सवाल पाकिस्तान को लेकर है. जिस तरह से भारत की मौजूदगी में पाकिस्तान ने कहा कि वो खुद आतंकवाद का शिकार है और उस पर प्रतिबंध हटने चाहिए, भारत का क्या मानना है और दोनों देशों के बीच मुलाकात की क्या कोई संभावना थी या क्यों नहीं बैठक हो सकी, और खासतौर से चीन के साथ? थैंक यू.
Nainima from the print, in Prime Minister's bilateral discussion with the Iranian president, was there a discussion on resumption of oil and also on the next, the Chabahar project on the Zahedan rail link? Thank you.
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bilateral Bhutto said a decision has not been made by Pakistan yet about whether Pakistan will attend the SCO meetings in India as well as the SCO summit. Could there be a problem with that?
So Siddhant from WION, were there any pleasantries exchanged between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, or a handshake between the two leaders?
Abhishek.
Sir, Abhishek from CNN News 18. Sir, did you say that SCO will come out with a list of terrorist organizations and individuals?
Yeah.
Smita Sharma, from the comments that came through in the opening, in the remarks of Prime Minister Modi to President Putin, it looked like New Delhi was a lot more kind of categorical in saying that it's essentially up to Russia now to try and take more steps towards resolving the Ukrainian conflict. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Sir, Manish Chan, India Rights Network. So what was the discussion on Afghanistan like? You know, I wish to draw your attention to Pakistan.
With whom?
No, in general, within SCO. The role of the SCO in stabilizing. And, you know, in his remarks, Pakistan Prime Minister called for unfreezing of the assets of the Taliban. He pitched very hard for recognition of the Taliban regime. What was the view of the SCO?
Last question. Oh, you
Sir,
have quickly. Yes.
अभिषेक उपाध्याय एबीपी न्यूज से सर एक जो पॉलिटिकल कंट्रोवर्सी हो गई जो ऑर्डर था खड़े होने का सारे राष्ट्राध्यक्षों का उसको लेकर के उस पर आप क्या कहेंगे कि क्या उसके पीछे का प्रोटोकॉल क्या था जो कंट्रोवर्सी हुई उसकी क्या हकीकत क्या है तो आप क्लेरिफाई करेंगे तो चीजें क्लियर होंगी उससे
So Maha Siddiqui, was there any request at all from the Chinese side for a meeting which never materialized?
Okay, so I think that sums it up, sir. I hand over.
Let
Except
me-
for the
let-
standing one. If you want, I'll tackle the standing one.
Why don't you tackle that first?
Look, there is a standing, it's a practice in the SCO in the restricted format. People stand according to the Russian alphabet starting from India because that's the first. There's a small change, perhaps that's chair, but we have always been on that side. I don't know why the controversy arose.
Yeah, okay. Let me first tackle the whole range of questions which relate to which meetings happened, which meetings didn't happen, why didn't they happen. I have already briefed you in a not too extensive a detail with regard to the key meetings, all the key bilateral meetings that Prime Minister had on the sidelines of the SCO summit, including with the presidents of Uzbekistan, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. With regard to what I would like to say is that all the meetings that were scheduled for which the requests came to us were factored in, and all the meetings took place as per the schedule. So whatever I've not briefed you is obviously the meeting which didn't take place. I don't think there is anything more to read into that than what the fact is, that what took place and what didn't take place. On the आपका जो I think Pakistan से related आपका प्रश्न उसी तक ही सीमित था. On the resumption of oil, Chabahar connectivity and the trade link, I think that was your question. Our discussions with Iran, if you look at the history of our discussions with Iran, the questions relating to energy security have always been an important element of it. Whether it has been in the past, that is during the pre-JCPOA days, or even sometimes during the successful implementation of the JCPOA, whether it's a question of oil trade, India's investments, joint investments in that field, that has always been a scope of conversation. And I think it is quite natural that if the two leaders would meet, they would take stock of what the status of that cooperation is. Similar applies to Chabahar port and the related modes of connectivity that associate themselves with Chabahar port, whether it is the railroad connectivity or the road links which radiate out of Chabahar port into other parts of the region. Chabahar port is an important element of the regional connectivity pillar, as I mentioned, and this figured extensively and in some detail in Prime Minister's discussion with the President of Iran and of course with the President of Uzbekistan, who are very, very closely interested, deeply interested in ensuring that the connectivity between India and the Central Asian countries improves. And of course for us, the connectivity improves not just with Central Asian countries, but even beyond the region. Smita, I think.
Comments on the Russian president and whether the onus, in a way, is with Russia now to stop the
Okay,
Ukraine.
I think it would be very unfair for me to interpret what the two leaders openly said. You all heard them very, very clearly. What I would say is very clear, and I think it's not a question of it's up to whom to take the first step in the current ongoing situation in Russia-Ukraine. I think what's important is the perspective, the line of effort, the line of thinking that India has stood for. And if you actually analyze it in detail, you would clearly see the underlying intent and the objective behind it when we say that hostilities should cease and the path to resolution of the Russia-Ukraine currently ongoing conflict is through diplomacy and dialogue. And I think that came out very clearly in Prime Minister Modi's initial opening remarks during his meeting with President Putin, which were live for the public. Manish, I think on Afghanistan, I think the question related to Afghanistan, I've already highlighted that our approach on Afghanistan is something which Prime Minister Modi put across very strongly in his intervention at the summit, as also in his bilateral conversations with his counterpart leaders from other countries. And it was very clearly mentioned that one, India's priorities in Afghanistan has always been of the kind which link themselves to the benefit, development of Afghan people, whether it is through the humanitarian assistance or it is through the development cooperation partnership projects. The essential focus is on the human-centric nature of our association with Afghanistan. What should be the shape of Afghan government, what happens there is something for Afghan people to determine, but we have always stood for an inclusive Afghan government which is Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. And I think that perspective came out very clearly in Prime Minister's interventions, as also in his conversation with other leaders. राष्ट्रीय अध्यक्ष किस प्रकार से खड़े हुए उस प्रश्न का उत्तर ऑलरेडी हमारे स्पोक्स पर्सन दे चुके हैं. बाकी प्रश्नों का उत्तर भी रेस्ट ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस आल्सो आई थिंक आई हैव आंसर्ड.
पाकिस्तान के प्रधानमंत्री को लेकर जो मेरा सवाल था, आतंकवाद को लेकर जो उन्होंने झूठ बोला, उस पर भारत क्या करेगा, क्योंकि उसके आतंकवाद से भारत प्रभावित रहा है. वो कह रहे हैं
आप क्वेश्चन
देखिए, पाकिस्तान ने आतंकवाद के बारे में क्या क्या, ये तो आप पाकिस्तान से पूछें तो अति उत्तम रहेगा. लेकिन भारत का आतंकवाद को लेकर क्या परिप्रेक्ष्य है वो हमेशा से स्पष्ट है. आतंकवाद एक क्षेत्रीय समस्या है. आतंकवाद की उत्पत्ति कहाँ है, उसका मिटिगेशन कैसे हो, उसको संभालने के लिए, उसको मिटिगेट करने के लिए किस प्रकार से क्षेत्रीय देश एक साथ संगठित हों, एक साथ मिलकर उसका समाधान ढूंढें. SCO के एजेंडा में वही एक मुख्य परिप्रेक्ष्य था. और जो जैसे मैंने आपको बताया कि जो SCO के स्ट्रक्चर हैं, रीजनल एंटी टेररिज्म स्ट्रक्चर, उसके अंतर्गत SCO संस्था के रूप में और उस संस्था के द्वारा सदस्य लोग जो हैं वो किस प्रकार से आतंकवाद की समस्या का मुकाबला करते हैं वो सुनिश्चित किया जाता है. किसने क्या कहा, वो सच का झूठ का, तो आप जिसने कहा उन्हीं से पूछें तो ठीक रहेगा.
SCO में पाकिस्तान आना नहीं चाहते. नेक्स्ट ईयर पाकिस्तान.
Sorry.
No, the two
That's a very, I think that was a specific thing which unless you want to add anything to it, I think that's what it was.
The press release with Iran talks about Iran briefing on the negotiations on JCPOA.
Your question is not coming on microphone. No, they want to know JCPOA.
Yeah.
In particular on JCPOA, what has...
Well, I think the President of Iran in the conversation very briefly touched upon their perspective on what the current status of ongoing JCPOA negotiations are.
Thank you very much for your presence here today. We have to close it now. Thank you.